It was so like entrepreneurial and startup style in on all levels of skateboarding back then. It was crazy. There was no X Games, there was no Olympics and skateboarding and commercials, like none of that shit. So uh, we had an international presence because Steve made that possible. Um, I had gone to college. I mean, that's something that's kind of weird. I don't talk a lot about having an education because in our industry, it's not that common.
Mhm.
So I was educated. So
And
I
what did you do in college?
I studied graphic design, merchandising, and illustration, fashion illustration. And I graduated with it's called visual communications at the Art Institute of Atlanta.
Mhm.
So I did know how to use computers. I knew about marketing. I did have a level of education. Plus, I worked my whole life. I worked at skate shops. I like knew about silk screening. I knew about like, I was a sponsored skater too.
Mhm.
So I knew about graphics. I knew about like traveling and working it with sponsors and being at a shop and being like, "Hey, you should carry this brand." And I was hucking the brands I was like to the sponsors that I had at the time, I was like one of their favorite team riders, not because I was the best skater, because I was really good at like going into a shop and being like, "Hey, why don't you have New Deal boards here? You should have New Deal boards," and go do the demo and then be like, "Oh, everybody here buy a New Deal board." I was just that kind of guy. Um, and so that gave me the, I think, awareness to, and I mentioned this, and I was in music and kind of around the hip hop industry, and kind of saw like I'd done some a lot of graphic design and work inside the music industry. Plus, I interned at a graphic design studio, and our number one account was Coca-Cola. So I had these things that like were very uncommon
Mhm.
to like a street skater,
Yeah.
like kid from New York. And so I applied all that to answer your question into the business and kind of stumbled along the way and really just mirrored a lot of my favorite companies too. I should mention that Rodney Smith, Bruno Musso, and this guy by the name of Nick Hartman were these three individuals on the East Coast that were like pioneers of skateboarding. And I watched these guys like a hawk, especially Rodney Smith and Nick. Um, and everything they did, I just found I was very fascinated by the management of skateboard companies. Like Nick was like just a great he ran a skate shop called Concrete Beach out of Albany, New York at the time. And Rodney and Bruno are the founders of Shet Skates,
Mhm.
which then later became Zoo York.
Mhm.
And I skated with those guys in the Shet team all the time. And I was fascinated by how Rodney and Bruno kept the scene just so tight and how they treated the riders and how Shut was like dominating New York and the East Coast at the time. And so I actually had a really big impact on me.
Mhm.
And so when I went on to do Element and many other companies, I always had this in my brain of like, this is how these guys do it. This is how they ran a team that was borderline like the Bones Brigade of the East Coast.
Mhm.
And that became like my business model. Shut was a huge factor
Mhm.
in how I wanted Element to operate because it was inspired a lot by Shut Skates.
So at what point did things start to change from being this like, you had nothing, you had no money, you're living in the office to you're like, oh, actually we're gaining traction. We're actually becoming a business.
Repeat it one more time. I want to answer it
At
clear.
what point did it transition from being this like passion project where you're just like pushing it uphill and you're not making any money to becoming a business that's self-sustaining and actually starting to grow?
It was a really long road. So people think maybe, when you look back on it, it happened overnight. It was really like, brick by brick. I mean, it was a brick by brick situation where it started out really small. The industry got a little more traction and skateboarding was becoming more popular. And we had like done the hard work in the beginning. So we had survived and built a really strong business early on. So we had that architecture in place through the roughest time.
Mhm.
So then by having that sort of that like I guess you would almost compare it to like your core here.
Mhm.
So we had a really strong core, and so then when skateboarding was growing, we were ready for it. We were ready for it. We really had we were sharp. So we were able to ship product. during the time when the demand was starting to be created. Uh, we had a brand which I believe was important because it was friendly and it was kind and it really was starting to speak to where skateboarding and as it was getting more popular, if you're like a parent or even a shop and you're like, I don't know what decision to make. Should I carry this or that? And you're like, Element's pretty safe
Yeah.
and it's dope and it's also not offensive. And I just opened up the shop. I just got through all these hard times. I'm not going to take a lot of chances. And maybe I'm giving not giving Element enough credit
Mm.
because the way I'm kind of describing, like, But I think that was a big part of it. And it was like this positive brand. And I was really starting to like come out of my shell too, and really starting to feel a lot more comfortable with my role in the company. And that I think was a big thing because I was like Element's biggest sort of fan. In the early days, going back to those insecurities as an artist, I had a lot of those insecurities as an entrepreneur.
Mm.
So that kept me from being like out there really like claiming what this company means. And there was just like a point, I think, where all of a sudden I just decided I'm going to really put myself out there and really start being more engaged with the community, the businesses, go to these trade shows. Go, like I had literally avoided trade shows like the Black Plague. I just didn't want to go to them. I had like a lot of social anxiety, which, we had mentioned mental health earlier, which I would not mind touching on because I think it's important to the listeners. But I had a lot of struggles on that side of things. And so I think one of the turning points for Element was me coming to terms with a lot of that too, and getting myself out there. And then that like led to the company. I would go to a Zoomies meeting and be like, this is what you need to do. Like, this is the brand and this is why it's dope. And, a lot of founders weren't doing that at the time and really getting super involved. And I think that actually helped quite a bit. I'm not trying to take credit away from anyone at all, but it's not common back then that I would just be in every meeting, every decision, everything. I was always there, always engaged with the team, traveled with the team, skated with the team, went to every meeting, went to every Zoomies 100K, every flipping thing. I was just there, 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 there. So it was just like hammering this business any which way I looked. I was just part of it. And then skateboarding was growing in popularity and I was just prepared and ready to roll. And a ton of great timing. I think a classic story is that I was doing yoga and I went to a yoga class. I'll never forget. I saw a woman in the yoga class wearing an Element shirt. And I was like, okay, like something's going on right now. Like this is it. Like you're doing something right. And I think it's funny because in skateboarding, most people would have like, especially the way the industry is, and that's a huge problem in the industry, by the way, from a business standpoint, because I actually think this is what really separated Element from the pack, is that I looked at that moment as a defining moment of awesomeness.
Yeah.
I'm in a yoga class in Newport Beach, and there's a woman in my yoga class who does not fit the demographic whatsoever, and she's rocking an Element shirt. And most people, especially even today, this would happen. They'd be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, I just saw a woman going back to the glasses half full and being grateful. Bro, I was just in a yoga class, or my wife, not even, my wife was in a yoga class, her girlfriend, and she just came home and she saw someone in an Element shirt. What are we going to do? That's skateboarding, right? What are we going to do? We got to change shit. Yeah. And I was like, yo, I was in a yoga class today and there was a woman wearing a Element shirt. Guys, we're doing something right.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, the irony is hilarious because that's, going to what I'm doing today with Target and things like that. Like, I look at those things like base hits. Like, I'm like, man. Hell yeah. What are we trying to do? Keep this all to ourselves? Totally. What the hell is that going to do?
Totally, man.
And that's skateboarding culture. But I'm so good at deviating from the question.
No, I mean, I love that. Can I give you an example from my life?
Sure.
So I grew up playing music, and although I was a therapist, I always was kind of like more focused on playing in bands, even though I'm a terrible musician. But after like kind of like my main band broke up, where I'd been like the guy who kind of did everything, facilitated everything, and we'd gotten to kind of, like within a very small world, we'd gotten into like kind of a cool spot within that small world before the band broke up. So I was at a show years later, and I'm talking to this dude who played in a band that we had done some shows with. Him and I are chilling, and he's like, "God, you're actually like a pretty funny guy." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, everyone just kind of thinks, and this is like, and I hate when people do this. It's like everyone. It's like, well, who are you? Like, the town reporter? Like, what do you mean everybody? It's like everyone just always thinks you're just like this business guy. You're just like numbers and figures and next show and getting to the blah blah blah. And I was like, and he's like, I always just thought you were a business guy, but like you're like a cool dude. And I was, for a moment, I was like, who the fuck is this guy? And then I took it back. I took a pause, and I was like, hey man, doing anything requires one person, and hopefully more than that one person, but at least one person to take responsibility for that thing happening. Whether you're going to go have sandwiches with your friend, or whether you're
Mhm.
going to go be in a band, or you're going to start a company. If you're in the right situation, it's you and everyone else you're doing with it, all working together at the same level or degrees of the same level, creating that thing.
Yeah.
If you're not in a great situation, it's one person, and that one person gets it in a way the rest of those people do not get it.
Yeah.
But that one person is an outsider, that maybe they're like the jerk of the band, or they're like the business guy of the band, or like they're
Sure.
the jerk friend, or they're this or that. And I walked away from that conversation, and like we ended up having a good conversation, but I walked away thinking like I'm just a different cat. And
Yeah.
and there are scenarios where I can be in where I don't need to do that at all. It's like, hey, let's hang out, let's have sandwiches. You drive it. I don't care, like whatever. But anything that I think is worth doing that I'm into, I want to play all in, and I want people on my left and right who want to do that as well.
Exactly.
And if you can't do that, no problem. That's totally cool. But I'm also at a place in my life where I'm comfortable enough to say, if you can't do that, you should probably choose something else.
Yeah.
Or you're or you don't get a vote, basically.
Yeah.
It's like, you can, if you want to be all in, you get a vote. Your
Yeah.
vote is equal to mine. We're going to do it. If you don't want to, if you're not all in, hey, maybe you should go somewhere else, or come along for the ride and your opinion's not needed. Like, just get
Yeah.
in.